Fame is often painted as the ultimate dream, but behind the glamour lies a reality far darker and far more complicated. Some stars rise quietly, enjoying their moment in the spotlight before slipping into history, remembered for a hit song or a flash of brilliance. But then there are others, the rare figures who don't just perform, they dominate, they disrupt, and they force the world to pay attention no matter how chaotic the cost. This is the story of one of those figures, an artist whose journey is as turbulent as it is inspiring, someone who has managed to remain both celebrated and criticized, adored by millions yet constantly surrounded by whispers of controversy. From the very beginning, their life has been marked by extremes, impossible struggles that threatened to break them, unbelievable talent that couldn't be ignored, and choices that left fans and critics divided. What makes their story unforgettable isn't just the music or the fame, it's the unpredictability, the constant tension between brilliance and self-destruction, between authenticity and spectacle. At every turn they've sparked debates, fueled rumours, and created moments that left the world stunned. And while some stars fade with time, this one remains a magnet for attention, partly because the story never feels complete. Every triumph seems followed by a crisis, every scandal followed by a comeback, and every rumour only adds another layer of fascination. This isn't just a career, it's a saga, one that reflects the dangerous dance between fame and downfall, genius and controversy. As we unravel their life and career, one truth becomes undeniable. This artist is not just another name in music history, but a figure who rewrote the rules, challenged the system, and left a legacy as messy as it is unforgettable. Every legend begins somewhere, but the origins of this story are far from glamorous. Long before the lights of sold-out arenas and the roar of millions of fans, there was a childhood defined by challenges that could have crushed someone less determined. Growing up, the artist was surrounded by a world that didn't promise success but instead demanded survival. Financial struggles were part of daily life, shaping an environment where nothing came easy, and every dream felt out of reach. The family's circumstances often forced difficult choices, and while outsiders might assume that hardship only builds strength, the reality was much harsher. It wasn't just about going without. It was about living with the constant reminder that the world wasn't built to make space for someone like them. From an early age, the artist learned resilience not as a virtue but as a necessity. School provided no escape. Far from being a sanctuary, it became another arena where they had to fight to belong. Teachers overlooked their potential, classmates underestimated them, and moments of encouragement were few and fleeting. Yet even in those bleak days, there were sparks of creativity, small acts of expression that hinted at the brilliance waiting to break free. Whether it was scribbling lyrics in the margins of notebooks, humming melodies that nobody else cared to hear, or imitating idols who seemed untouchable on television screens, there was a constant flame inside them. But that flame was fragile, constantly threatened by the winds of doubt, rejection, and the harsh reality of growing up in a place where dreams were often dismissed as distractions. At home, life was no less complicated. Family dynamics added layers of tension, with arguments, pressure, and expectations that often clashed with the artist's growing need to create. Support was inconsistent. At times, there was encouragement, but just as often there were voices urging them to abandon their passion for something more practical, more stable. Yet instead of extinguishing their drive, those voices only made them more determined to prove everyone wrong. It wasn't just about wanting success. It became about needing to escape, needing to carve out a future that looked nothing like the past they had endured. But determination alone wasn't enough. There were moments of failure, brutal reminders that talent doesn't always translate into opportunity. Early auditions ended with rejection slips, performances were met with silence, and doors closed before they even had the chance to prove themselves. Each rejection carried the sting of humiliation, but rather than walking away, they let it fuel their resolve. Every no became a challenge to push harder, to improve, to sharpen their craft until it was undeniable. And while the world kept pushing them down, they kept finding ways to rise, even if only inch by inch. The turning point in these formative years wasn't a sudden discovery of talent, but the realization that pain itself could become art. Instead of hiding from the struggles, the artist began to weave them into their creativity. Lyrics turned into confessions. Rhythms became outlets for rage, and melodies carried both sorrow and hope. What others might have seen as weaknesses, the scars of hardship, the experiences of rejection, the constant sense of being an outsider became the very foundation of their artistic identity. In a world where so many tried to blend in, they learned to stand out by turning vulnerability into power. Still, the path forward was anything but clear. Rumours swirled even in those early days about whether the artist had what it really took, whether the struggles had left them too unstable to ever thrive. Some whispered that their rawness was nothing more than recklessness, that their refusal to conform would destroy any chance at success. But those whispers only deepened the sense of mystery around them. Were they destined to fail, or were they carving out a new path that others were simply too blind to see? In the midst of all this uncertainty, one truth stood out. Every great story needs a beginning that feels impossible, and in many ways the artist's early life was designed to break them down, to crush their spirit before it could even take shape. But instead it forged someone unrelenting, someone willing to embrace risk, failure and pain if it meant carving out a space in the world. By the time the first real opportunity appeared on the horizon, they weren't just ready, they were hungry. The struggles that might have ended someone else became the very fuel that would launch them into a career destined to shake the foundations of the industry. Looking back, it's tempting to see those early years as a mere prologue, a setup for the fame and chaos that would follow. But in truth, they were more than that. They were the crucible where identity was forged, where the foundation of resilience, creativity and defiance was laid. Without those struggles, there would be no legend. Without the pain, there would be no art. And without the constant feeling of being underestimated, there would be no drive to prove the world wrong. These beginnings weren't just difficult, they were essential. And so, the artist emerged from those early struggles carrying not just talent but scars, not just dreams but determination sharpened by rejection. The stage was set, the fire was lit, and the world had no idea what was about to hit it. What came next wasn't smooth or safe, it was explosive, risky, and unpredictable. But it was also inevitable, because once someone has fought their way through a childhood designed to crush them, the prospect of fame isn't intimidating. It's the natural next step in a story that was always meant to shock, to inspire, and to defy expectations at every turn. Every great story has a turning point, and for this artist, that moment arrived not with comfort or certainty, but with the kind of raw energy that can only be born from desperation. After years of being dismissed, overlooked and underestimated, the breakthrough came suddenly, almost violently, shaking the foundations of an industry that had no idea what was coming. It didn't happen because someone opened a door. It happened because the artist kicked it down, and when they did, the world had no choice but to pay attention. At first, it wasn't obvious. Early recordings and small performances hinted at potential, but were often buried beneath the noise of countless others chasing the same dream. Yet, there was something about them that refused to blend in, something sharper, hungrier, and more unpredictable than the polished acts that filled the airwaves. They carried the grit of their past into every note, every lyric, every movement, and while not everyone liked it, no one could ignore it. The moment of breakthrough wasn't about fitting into the mold of what the industry wanted, it was about breaking that mold entirely. The first big opportunity came with a performance that was supposed to be small, forgettable even, a chance to prove themselves on a stage that had seen countless hopefuls before. But the second they stepped up, everything changed. The energy in the room shifted. The crowd, at first skeptical, found themselves pulled in by a presence too magnetic to resist. It wasn't about flawless execution, it was about raw authenticity. Every line felt lived, every word carried the weight of experience, and the delivery wasn't polished. It was electric, unpredictable, and impossible to replicate. By the end, the same people who might have doubted them moments earlier were buzzing, whispering, and spreading the word. Something different had just happened. From there, momentum built like a storm. One recording went viral, not because it was engineered to succeed, but because it struck a chord that felt too real to ignore. Fans latched onto the authenticity, critics took notice, and industry insiders began to circle. For some, this artist was a risky bet, someone too unpredictable to invest in. But for others, they were the future, a breath of fresh air in a market saturated with safe, predictable acts. The first contract offer arrived soon after, and with it came the realization that the impossible was finally within reach. But even as opportunities opened, the artists carried their scars with them. They weren't just grateful, they were defiant, determined to show the world that this wasn't luck, this wasn't chance, this was inevitable. The breakthrough wasn't only about recognition, it was about control. From the beginning, the artist resisted the pressure to conform. Labels wanted to smooth out the edges, to package them neatly for mass consumption, but the very thing that made them magnetic was their refusal to play by the rules. This tension created sparks, arguments with executives, rumours of being difficult, stories of battles behind closed doors. Yet those same battles made the art sharper, bolder, and more authentic. Instead of bending, they forced the industry to bend around them, setting a precedent that would define their career from that moment forward. What made this breakthrough even more explosive was the timing. The culture was shifting, audiences were hungry for something new, and the traditional gatekeepers were losing their grip. The artist arrived at the exact moment when authenticity became more valuable than polish, when risk became more exciting than safety. Their music, their image, their story, it all resonated with a generation tired of recycled formulas. Suddenly they weren't just another artist breaking through, they were the voice of something bigger, the symbol of a cultural shift. But with fame came new pressures. Overnight, the artist went from being ignored to being everywhere. Interviews, photo shoots, performances, and endless scrutiny filled their days. Every word was dissected, every move analysed. And while some thrived under that spotlight, this artist wrestled with it. Fame magnified their contradictions, the brilliance and the chaos, the confidence and the insecurity. For fans, this only added to the intrigue. They weren't watching a polished star, they were watching a real human being grappling with a sudden rise, and that vulnerability made them even more captivating. Behind the scenes, the artist's circle began to shift. Old friends couldn't keep up, new faces crowded in, some offering support, others looking to take advantage. Trust became a rare commodity, and paranoia crept in. Yet through it all, the work didn't stop. If anything, the chaos fueled it. Nights blurred into mornings in studios, songs poured out like confessions, and performances carried the intensity of someone who knew they might not get another chance. Each step forward felt like walking a tightrope, but the higher the stakes, the more fearless they became. The breakthrough was not without controversy. Early on, rumours swirled about reckless behaviour, feuds with rivals, and clashes with industry insiders. Some called it arrogance, others called it authenticity. But either way, it only fueled the fire. Headlines painted them as unpredictable, a star too wild to last, but fans defended them fiercely, drawn even closer by the sense that they were witnessing something raw and real. In a way, the controversies weren't setbacks. They were accelerants, adding fuel to the narrative that this was no ordinary career. This was a saga unfolding in real time, and everyone wanted to watch. Looking back, that breakthrough moment wasn't just a career milestone. It was a declaration of war against the odds, the industry, and even the expectations of fame itself. It marked the moment when the underdog became a phenomenon, when rejection transformed into recognition, and when the story of survival became the story of domination. And while many artists see their breakthrough as the peak, for this one, it was only the beginning. Because once the world was watching, the real challenge began, keeping it, shocking it, and rewriting the rules again and again. The rise to fame is never a straight line. It is a storm of opportunity, chaos, triumph, and disaster all swirling at once. And for this artist, it came like a tidal wave that refused to stop. After the breakthrough moment cracked open the door, the rise was about blowing it off its hinges and stepping into a world that both welcomed and feared them. Almost overnight, they went from a name whispered in underground circles to a headline plastered across every magazine, blog, and social feed. Fans couldn't get enough. Critics sharpened their pens, and the industry realized it had underestimated someone who was about to take center stage whether it liked it or not. The rise was not gentle. It was explosive, like watching a star ignite right before your eyes, unpredictable and unstoppable. The first major release became more than just an album. It was a statement. Every track carried the scars of their past, the hunger of their ambition, and the defiance of someone who refused to be silenced. Songs became anthems for a generation that felt unseen, tapping into frustrations and dreams that resonated far beyond the artist's own story. Each performance was electric, each interview unpredictable, and each appearance became an event in itself. The public couldn't look away because this wasn't just music. It was spectacle, rebellion, and vulnerability all tangled into one. Fame didn't simply find them. They grabbed it by the throat and forced the world to watch. With fame came opportunities that once seemed impossible. Stages that had felt like fantasies were now real, with thousands of fans screaming every lyric back at them. Collaborations with names they had once idolized began to materialize, blurring the line between outsider and insider. They weren't just joining the industry, they were bending it around their orbit. Every chart climb, every sold-out show, every viral moment became fuel for the growing narrative that this wasn't a flash in the pan. This was a takeover. But the rise to fame wasn't just about victories, it was also about battles. Success painted a target on their back. Critics dismissed them as reckless, rivals bristled at their sudden dominance, and even within the industry, whispers grew about their refusal to conform. Every bold statement in interviews sparked debates, every social media post dissected, every offhand comment turned into headlines. Yet, instead of retreating, the artist leaned into the chaos. They thrived on the tension, using it as proof that they were shaking the system. For fans, this only deepened the loyalty. To them, the artist wasn't just a performer, they were a fighter, someone unafraid to be messy, flawed, and brutally authentic in a world obsessed with perfection. As their fame spread, so did the mythology. Stories about their wild lifestyle began to circulate, some true, others exaggerated, but all feeding into the aura of unpredictability. Tales of sleepless nights in the studio, outrageous demands on tour, fiery clashes with peers, and brushes with the law blurred into legend. People who had never even listened to a full song knew the name because the persona had become larger than the art itself. Fame had turned them into a cultural figure, someone impossible to ignore whether you loved or hated them. The rise also came with pressure that weighed heavily. The demands of constant touring, recording, and appearances left little room for rest or reflection. Friends were lost along the way, replaced by entourages of managers, agents, and opportunists who all had their own agendas. Privacy disappeared, replaced by constant cameras and speculation. Every stumble became front-page news, every mistake magnified for the world to see. For most people, this level of attention would be unbearable, but for this artist, it was both a curse and a weapon. The same scrutiny that threatened to break them also kept them in the spotlight, ensuring the world never stopped talking. At the heart of this rise was the connection with the fans. Concerts became almost religious experiences, with crowds hanging on every word, screaming until their voices cracked, and feeling as though they were part of something bigger than themselves. The artist gave them not just music, but a piece of themselves, raw, unfiltered, and unapologetic. That bond was unlike anything the industry could manufacture, and it made the rise feel unstoppable. It wasn't marketing, it wasn't strategy, it was authenticity, and that made it indestructible, at least for a time. Inevitably, though, fame exposed contradictions. The same artist who preached independence now relied on a machine of handlers to keep things running. The same figure who seemed untouchable was vulnerable to the very temptations fame provided: money, excess, and distractions that could derail even the strongest. Whispers of burnout, conflict, and reckless behavior began to swirl. But those only seemed to fuel the spectacle. Fans saw the struggles and felt even closer. Critics saw cracks and sharpened their knives, and the media knew every slip would sell headlines. The rise to fame wasn't smooth. It was jagged, dangerous, and exhilarating to watch. And yet, through all of it, the music didn't suffer. In fact, it thrived. Each new project seemed to reflect the chaos of their life, capturing both the highs of triumph and the lows of self-destruction. Critics who once dismissed them began to admit there was genius in the madness, brilliance in the chaos. The artist wasn't just surviving fame, they were feeding off it, transforming every rumour, every scandal, every controversy into material that deepened their legend. The world wasn't just watching an artist rise, It was watching a human being turn life itself into art, no matter how messy or destructive it became. The rise to fame solidified one truth. This was no ordinary career. It wasn't about playing by the rules, fitting into neat boxes, or carefully curating a perfect image. It was about tearing down walls, living on the edge, and daring the world to keep up. Fame had been both a gift and a curse, but above all it had been fuel for the fire that made this artist impossible to ignore. And as their name became etched into the cultural conversation, one thing became clear. The rise was just the beginning. The real question wasn't whether they could achieve fame, but whether they could survive it. Reaching the peak of stardom is like standing on a razor's edge. You're higher than anyone else. The world is watching your every move, and one wrong step can send you plummeting into chaos. For this artist, the peak wasn't just about recognition. It was about domination. They weren't simply another star in the constellation of music. They were the centre, the gravitational force pulling everything toward them. Their music was everywhere, blasting from cars, played at parties, remixed in clubs, and quoted on social media by fans and celebrities alike. Every release was an event, every performance a headline, and every public appearance sparked a frenzy. They weren't just an artist. They had become a cultural phenomenon, someone whose presence demanded attention, whether you loved them, hated them, or just couldn't stop talking about them. This period in their career was marked by massive commercial success. Chart-topping singles seemed to arrive one after another, each one bigger than the last. Entire albums went platinum within days of release. Streaming numbers shattered records, and tickets for their tours sold out faster than venues could even list them online. Headlines declared them unstoppable, and fans began to see them as larger than life, almost untouchable. They were no longer just speaking to a specific generation, they were shaping it. Lyrics became mantras, fashion choices became trends, and every move they made rippled out into popular culture like shockwaves. The influence was undeniable, and for a while it seemed endless. But at the top, the spotlight burns the brightest, and every shadow is amplified. The artist's eccentricities, once celebrated as part of their charm, began to fuel criticism. Tabloids dissected every outfit, every expression, every word said in interviews. Stories of extravagant parties, feuds with other celebrities, and erratic behaviour became daily headlines. Some saw these as signs of genius, others as cracks in the carefully constructed image, but no one could deny the effect. It kept people watching, and watching was all that mattered. Fame, at this point, had become a performance of its own, a theatre in which the artist played both the star and the villain, depending on who you asked. Yet, amidst the chaos, the artistry never wavered. In fact, many argue that this period produced some of their best work, songs that captured both the exhilaration of success and the torment of pressure, performances that seemed to channel raw emotion into unforgettable spectacles. This was art born out of contradiction. Fans connected not just with the triumphs, but also with the vulnerability hiding beneath the glittering exterior. The artist had mastered the balance of appearing untouchable while still revealing just enough humanity to keep the audience invested. It wasn't just music anymore, it was storytelling, and every album felt like another chapter in an ever-unfolding saga. Of course, with the peak came isolation. Fame can build walls as quickly as it opens doors, and while the world cheered their every move, the artist often found themselves surrounded by people with agendas rather than genuine loyalty. Old friends drifted away, replaced by industry figures and hangers-on who saw them as a ticket to their own success. Trust became scarce, and paranoia became a quiet companion. Rumours of betrayal and behind-the-scenes tension swirled, feeding into the narrative that the higher you climb, the lonelier it gets. Public perception also began to fracture. For some, the artist represented freedom, rebellion, and authenticity. For others, they were reckless, out of control, and a dangerous influence. Every controversy split audiences further, but paradoxically, that division only made them more famous. Controversy was fuel, and the artist knew how to use it. Instead of retreating, they leaned into the chaos, turning even their missteps into opportunities for reinvention. What should have been career-ending scandals instead became part of their legend, woven into the larger-than-life persona that fans couldn't look away from. At their peak, the artist also began expanding beyond music. fashion lines, brand partnerships, acting roles, and unexpected collaborations pushed them into every corner of popular culture. They weren't just an artist anymore, they were an empire. Every product they touched sold out, every project they endorsed became headline news, and every venture blurred the line between celebrity and mogul. This wasn't just stardom, it was cultural dominance. But with dominance came pressure to maintain it, and the weight of expectation grew heavier with every new milestone. Behind the scenes, the cracks were starting to show. The relentless pace of touring, recording, and performing took its toll physically and mentally. Whispers of exhaustion, erratic behaviour, and strained relationships with those closest to them hinted that the cost of fame was catching up. The same drive that had propelled them to the top now threatened to push them over the edge. Still, in public, they remained a spectacle of confidence and charisma, a master of performance who could hide pain behind a dazzling smile or explosive outburst. This duality, success and struggle, confidence and chaos, was what made their peak so unforgettable. Fans didn't just love the music, they loved the unpredictability. Every appearance felt like anything could happen. Every performance carried the possibility of history being made or disaster unfolding. It was that sense of danger, of living on the edge, that kept people glued to their screens and filling arenas night after night. The artist wasn't just giving the world entertainment, they were giving it adrenaline, drama, and authenticity in a package that no one else could replicate. Looking back, this peak of stardom feels like a paradox. The highest of highs mixed with the darkest of lows, the moments of glory inseparably tied to the whispers of downfall. It was a time when the artist stood on top of the world, commanding attention like few ever could. Yet at the same time, fighting battles most could never imagine. For the fans, it was exhilarating. For the critics, it was infuriating. And for the artist, it was both a dream and a nightmare. But one thing was certain. This peak etched their name into history, ensuring that no matter what happened next, they would never be forgotten. Every empire, no matter how powerful, eventually reveals the fractures hidden beneath its glittering surface, and for this artist the cracks began to show at the very height of their dominance. From the outside, it seemed as though nothing could shake them. They had conquered charts, shattered records, and commanded a fan base that worshipped their every move. Yet behind the flashing cameras and roaring crowds, subtle signs of wear began to appear, quiet warnings that the weight of success was becoming unbearable. At first, these cracks were easy to dismiss. A cancelled interview here, a late arrival to a show there, whispers of exhaustion brushed off as the natural cost of relentless stardom. But over time, the whispers grew louder, the patterns harder to ignore, and the facade of invincibility began to fade. It started with the relentless schedule. Non-stop touring left little time for sleep, let alone reflection. Nights blurred into mornings, hotel rooms into stadiums, and the artist often seemed trapped in a cycle of performance and travel with no escape. Friends and collaborators noticed the changes, irritability replacing charm, isolation replacing energy, and an underlying tension that hinted at deeper struggles. What had once been thrilling, the chaos of constant attention and activity, was now draining, slowly eroding their stability. Fame had turned into a cage, one gilded with money and adoration but suffocating nonetheless. Then came the controversies, each one hitting harder than the last. What used to be playful feuds or eccentric behaviour now began to look like reckless decisions. A fiery outburst on stage, a confrontation with paparazzi, cryptic posts on social media. All these moments fed the growing narrative that the artist was spiralling. Fans defended them passionately, pointing to the pressures of fame, but critics sharpened their knives, ready to declare that the superstar's reign was ending. Every misstep became magnified under the relentless glare of the spotlight, every rumour twisted into fact by tabloids hungry for headlines. Relationships added fuel to the fire. The artist's love life, once a subject of harmless gossip, now became a battlefield of speculation and scandal. High-profile romances, public breakups, and accusations of betrayal painted a picture of chaos that seemed to mirror their professional life. Friends turned to strangers, collaborators walked away, and betrayals both real and imagined began to haunt them. Trust, already fragile, evaporated completely, leaving them surrounded by people whose loyalty was always in question. Fame, once intoxicating, had become isolating, and the loneliness deepened the cracks. Substance abuse rumours soon followed, whispered in hushed tones behind the scenes and splashed across tabloids in bold headlines. Some stories exaggerated, others all too real, but together they fueled a perception that the superstar was losing control. Party culture, once seen as harmless fun, now seemed destructive, and images of late-night escapades painted a portrait of someone drowning in excess. The public devoured these stories, half in fascination, half in horror, waiting to see if the artist would crash or claw their way back. It was the paradox of celebrity. The same audience that had cheered their rise now seemed eager to watch their fall. Yet amidst the chaos, the artist's creativity did not vanish. If anything, it became darker, more raw, reflecting the turmoil inside. New songs hinted at battles with demons, lyrics full of pain, defiance, and desperation that resonated with fans on a deeper level. These tracks became cult favourites, proof that even as life spun out of control, the spark of genius still burned. But for every moment of brilliance, there was a public meltdown, every triumph shadowed by a scandal, and every success overshadowed by the growing perception that the superstar was unravelling before the world's eyes. What made this period so compelling was the unpredictability. No one knew what version of the artist would appear each day. Would it be the charismatic performer commanding the stage with fire and passion, or the troubled figure lashing out under the weight of pressure? That uncertainty kept the public hooked, unable to look away from the slow-burning drama. Fans prayed for redemption, critics predicted collapse, and the industry braced for what would happen next. The cracks were no longer small, they were widening and everyone knew it. The artists themselves seemed aware of it too. In rare, candid moments, hints of vulnerability slipped through the armour. Interviews contained admissions of fatigue, cryptic acknowledgements of personal battles, and moments where the mask slipped just enough for the world to glimpse the human behind the superstar. Those glimpses only made the story more captivating, reminding everyone that beneath the fame was someone fragile, flawed, and struggling to hold it all together. It was both heartbreaking and magnetic. Proof that even icons can break. But the machine of fame doesn't stop, even when its star begins to crumble. Contracts demanded albums, promoters demanded tours, and fans demanded content. There was no pause button, no time to heal, only the relentless expectation to deliver. That pressure, combined with mounting scandals, became the perfect storm that pushed the artist into even riskier territory. Every decision seemed more erratic, every public appearance carried the possibility of disaster, and every headline hinted at the possibility of downfall. The cracks were no longer warnings, they were battle scars, etched into the very fabric of the superstar's legacy. Looking back, this stage of their life and career feels inevitable, almost like the price of reaching such dizzying heights. The greater the rise, the sharper the fall, and the artist was caught in a cycle that has consumed countless stars before them. But what set their story apart was the resilience hidden beneath the chaos. Even as the world declared their career finished, even as scandals threatened to bury them, the artist refused to disappear quietly. They fought, sometimes recklessly, sometimes brilliantly, always unpredictably, ensuring that the story wasn't over yet. The cracks may have been widening, but they also revealed something powerful, a determination to survive, to keep fighting, and to remain unforgettable no matter the cost. Scandals are the currency of fame, and for this artist they became a shadow that followed every step, turning their life into a spectacle as unpredictable as their music. What began as whispers and rumours soon erupted into full-blown controversies that dominated headlines, trended across social media, and reshaped the way the public viewed them. Every misstep, every argument, every late-night post became fuel for the fire, and the backlash only grew with each new revelation. It wasn't just that scandals surrounded them. It was that scandals became inseparable from their image, as though chaos itself had been woven into their DNA. And the more the world talked, the harder it became to separate truth from exaggeration, reality from myth. The first wave of backlash came from clashes with peers in the industry. Feuds that once seemed playful turned bitter, spilling out in interviews, on social media, and even in music. diss tracks, subliminal jabs, and confrontational outbursts painted a picture of an artist at war not just with the system, but with anyone who dared challenge them. For fans, it was thrilling drama, a reminder of their rebellious spirit, but for critics, it was evidence of immaturity and instability. The industry thrived on the spectacle, knowing every feud sold records, but the constant tension deepened the narrative that this was an artist addicted to conflict. Then came the more personal scandals, the kind that pierced deeper into the public consciousness. Stories of wild parties, reckless behaviour, and questionable decisions began to circulate. Paparazzi photos caught them in compromising moments, sometimes intoxicated, sometimes enraged, and always looking like a person caught in a storm of their own making. Social media amplified everything, with hashtags trending worldwide within minutes of each new incident. Fans scrambled to defend them, insisting the media exaggerated, while detractors pointed to the evidence as proof of decline. Each scandal blurred the line between performance and reality, leaving everyone wondering, was this who they really were, or just another mask worn for attention? Legal troubles soon added fuel to the fire. Encounters with the law, whether over altercations, reckless behaviour, or accusations that surfaced, gave critics exactly what they needed to declare the superstar a danger to themselves and others. Court appearances, mugshots, and legal battles became public fodder, dissected in endless articles and late-night monologues. Even when outcomes were minor, the damage to their reputation was massive. Every accusation reinforced the perception of a star spiralling out of control, and every defense felt weaker against the sheer weight of headlines. Yet, paradoxically, the scandals didn't end their career. They fed it. Controversy made them unforgettable, and for every person who condemned them, another became intrigued enough to tune in. The backlash also extended to brand deals and partnerships. Companies that once clamoured to work with the superstar began to distance themselves, fearing association with their unpredictable behaviour. Endorsements were cancelled, projects delayed, and invitations rescinded. The same figure who had once been courted as a cultural icon was now considered too risky to touch. This professional fallout hurt not just financially but symbolically. It was a reminder that fame comes with conditions, and breaking those conditions carries a heavy price. Yet, instead of retreating, the artist doubled down, rejecting corporate approval and painting themselves as the outsider once more. Fans admired the defiance, critics saw desperation, but both sides kept watching. Social media, once their greatest weapon, became a double-edged sword. Posts that were once witty and rebellious now came across as erratic, sometimes deleted minutes after being posted, other times igniting firestorms of controversy. Rants against peers, cryptic messages, and shocking declarations fueled endless speculation. Was it a cry for help? A calculated move? Or simply the raw thoughts of someone cracking under pressure? Each post became an event, dissected by millions, turned into memes, and spun into narratives that rarely aligned with reality. The backlash here was brutal, but it also kept the artist at the centre of attention. In a culture addicted to drama, they were the main character whether they wanted to be or not. Perhaps the most damaging backlash came from within the fan base itself. For years, supporters had defended them through every storm, but even the most loyal began to show cracks in their faith. Some felt betrayed by reckless choices, others exhausted by constant scandals that overshadowed the music they loved. Online communities that once celebrated every move now debated whether the superstar had gone too far. This fracture was painful, because for the artist, fans had always been the lifeline, the source of strength that made everything bearable. To see that loyalty waver was a sign that the scandals weren't just noise. They were eroding the very foundation of their empire, and yet through it all, the artist refused to be silenced. If anything, the backlash seemed to ignite them further, pushing them to lean into controversy instead of retreating from it. Every scandal became fuel for new music, lyrics dripping with defiance, pain, and raw emotion. Songs addressed the critics, called out the media, and laid bare the struggles behind the headlines. For some fans, this honesty redeemed them, proof that the chaos wasn't just performance, but a reflection of a deeply human battle. For others, it was too little, too late. But one thing was undeniable. The backlash didn't end the story. It made it even more compelling. Looking back, This period of scandals and backlash feels like both a curse and a weapon. It threatened to destroy everything they had built, tearing apart relationships, finances, and credibility, yet it also cemented their status as one of the most polarizing figures in music history. Scandals made them infamous, but they also made them unforgettable. While many stars rise and fade quietly, this artist ensured that their story would be written in bold headlines, debated endlessly, and remembered long after the scandals themselves had faded. The cracks were now gaping wounds, the backlash deafening, but the artist was still standing, still fighting, still refusing to disappear, and what happened next would determine whether the scandals were the beginning of the end, or the foundation for an even more shocking reinvention. Every fallen star dreams of the comeback, the moment when the noise fades, the critics are silenced, and the spotlight shifts once again to the art, the passion, and the force that first captivated the world. For this artist, the comeback wasn't just a career move, it was survival. After scandals and backlash had battered their reputation, they knew redemption had to be earned, not handed out. The question wasn't whether the world would watch, they always did, but whether they could believe again. Could the superstar rebuild what seemed shattered beyond repair? Or had the damage already carved too deep to heal? The attempted comeback was a battle fought not on one front, but on many. Personal, professional, emotional, and cultural. It wasn't just about music. It was about proving they still mattered in a world that had grown addicted to their chaos. The first step came with silence. For months, the artist disappeared from the public eye, retreating into shadows that once terrified them. Headlines speculated endlessly. Rehab, breakdown, or exile. Some called it the end, while others whispered it was a reset. And then, quietly at first, hints of something new began to emerge. Leaked photos from the studio, cryptic messages on social media, whispers from collaborators that something different was coming. The narrative began to shift. Curiosity replaced condemnation, anticipation replaced fatigue, and suddenly the world was waiting again. It was a calculated move, one that reminded everyone of a timeless truth. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. When the comeback finally began to unfold, it was with a force no one could ignore. A new single dropped without warning. A surprise release that sent shockwaves through the industry. The sound was raw yet refined, reflecting scars from battles fought but also the fire of someone refusing to quit. Lyrically, it was a declaration of war, a defiant reminder that they weren't broken, just tested, and that the fight wasn't over. Fans who had wavered returned with renewed loyalty, blasting the song into trending charts across platforms, while critics, though skeptical, were forced to admit there was still power in the voice, still vision in the art. The comeback had officially begun, but it wasn't just about music. The artist understood that redemption required reinvention. Public appearances were carefully curated, showing humility without weakness, confidence without arrogance. Interviews revealed glimpses of vulnerability, confessions of mistakes made, and acknowledgements of battles fought. For the first time in years, the mask slipped just enough to let people see the human underneath the superstar, and that humanity became the cornerstone of the comeback. Fans didn't just want spectacle, they wanted honesty, and for the first time they felt they were getting it. Of course, not everyone was convinced. Skeptics pointed to the long history of false starts, insisting the chaos would return sooner or later. Every small slip was magnified, every stumble framed as proof that the comeback was destined to fail. But this time felt different, not because the artist had suddenly become flawless, but because they seemed determined to channel their flaws into fuel. Scandals became lessons, backlash became motivation, and vulnerability became their greatest weapon. The world, conditioned to expect collapse, now found itself surprised by resilience. The comeback reached its peak with a highly anticipated tour. After years of cancelled shows and erratic performances, fans wondered if the artist could still deliver live. What they got was a rebirth. Every performance was charged with an intensity that felt both desperate and triumphant, as if each note carried the weight of proving themselves all over again. The stage became a battlefield, the crowd their army, and the music their weapon. Night after night, the shows sold out. Not just because fans wanted nostalgia, but because they wanted to witness the fight to see whether redemption was truly possible. And for many it was. Reviews hailed the tour as a resurrection, a reminder that behind the scandals was still a performer unlike any other. The attempted comeback also carried symbolic victories. Awards shows that once snubbed them began to extend cautious invitations. Collaborators who had distanced themselves now expressed interest in working together again. Even brands, once quick to sever ties, slowly returned, eager to ride the wave of renewed relevance. It was as if the world, always eager to punish, was equally eager to forgive when given the chance. Redemption, after all, is one of the most powerful stories an audience can consume, and this artist was living it in real time. Yet, even at the height of the comeback, shadows lingered. Old habits are hard to break, and moments of volatility still threaten to undo progress. A controversial post, an offhand remark, a heated exchange, each sparked debates about whether the superstar had truly changed. For some, the cracks were proof of authenticity, a reminder that this was no polished product, but a flawed human navigating impossible circumstances. For others, it was evidence that the comeback was temporary, a fragile illusion destined to shatter. The truth likely lay somewhere in between, but what mattered was that the world was watching again, captivated by the story of survival. The most compelling part of the comeback wasn't perfection, it was perseverance. Fans connected not because the artist had erased the past, but because they seemed to be wrestling with it openly, transforming pain into performance, chaos into art. Each song, each performance, each headline became part of a redemption arc that felt both messy and inspiring. It was proof that comebacks don't require erasing mistakes. They require owning them, learning from them, and daring to keep going anyway. Looking back, the attempted comeback stands as one of the most fascinating chapters in the artist's saga. It wasn't flawless, it wasn't clean, but it was unforgettable. It reminded the world why they had fallen in love in the first place, not just with the music, but with the unpredictability, the rawness, and the humanity of a star who refused to be defeated. Whether it marked the start of lasting redemption, or just another chapter in an ongoing cycle of rise and fall, one thing was undeniable. The comeback proved that this artist was more than their scandals, more than their backlash, and more than their mistakes. They were a fighter, a survivor, and above all, a performer who knew how to turn life itself into a show the world could never stop watching. Reinvention is the lifeline of every star who survives the storm of fame, and for this artist, it was not just a strategy, but a necessity. After years of turmoil, scandal, and the hard-fought comeback, reinvention became the only way forward, the only chance to prove that they were not just a relic of past chaos, but a force capable of transformation. Reinvention in this case did not mean erasing the past. It meant reclaiming it, reshaping it, and using it as the foundation for something new. To evolve in front of the entire world is risky, but it is also electrifying, and for a figure who thrived on unpredictability, evolution became their most powerful move yet. The first stage of this reinvention was artistic. The music took a sharp turn, shedding some of the reckless energy of earlier work and replacing it with a more layered, mature sound. Lyrics became introspective, exploring themes of survival, redemption, and growth without losing the edge that had made them famous. Collaborations expanded beyond their usual circle, bringing in surprising names from other genres and even other art forms. The result was music that felt experimental yet grounded, daring yet vulnerable, and above all, authentic. Critics who once dismissed them as sensational now began to write of artistry, vision, and reinvention, words rarely associated with their name before. The artist had managed to pull off something remarkable, turning their scars into songs that resonated far beyond the tabloid headlines. But reinvention wasn't just about sound, it was about image. Gone were the endless paparazzi photos of reckless nights and fiery feuds. In their place appeared carefully curated visuals of a more composed, reflective figure. Fashion choices shifted from flamboyant shock value to bold statements of identity and maturity, still eye-catching but with an undeniable sophistication. Public appearances became opportunities not for chaos but for recalibration, as if every step onto a red carpet, every moment in front of a camera was part of a larger narrative of transformation. It was no longer about being unpredictable, It was about being undeniable. This reinvention extended into activism and influence. With a platform that had once been used to stoke controversy, the artists began to speak on issues that mattered deeply to them, lending their voice to causes that resonated with fans and critics alike. Instead of headlines about feuds, articles began to appear about philanthropy, advocacy, and impact. Skeptics questioned the sincerity, but the shift felt real, rooted in lived experience rather than public relations strategy. It was as though the chaos of their past had forged a deeper sense of purpose, and now that purpose was reshaping not just their career, but their entire legacy. Of course, reinvention did not come without resistance. Some fans longed for the raw chaos of earlier days, fearing that evolution meant losing the authenticity that had first drawn them in. Others questioned whether the change was permanent, or just another phase in a cycle of highs and lows. And critics, ever skeptical, watched closely for signs of relapse. But reinvention isn't about pleasing everyone. It's about daring to move forward, even if it means leaving some behind. And in this case, the artist seemed willing to take that risk, confident that evolution would bring new audiences, new respect, and a renewed place in the cultural conversation. The evolution also extended to personal life. While once every relationship, argument, and misstep had been public spectacle, now the artist embraced a new level of privacy. Social media, once a battlefield of rants and outbursts, became a carefully chosen window into their world, enough to keep fans engaged, but not enough to fuel endless controversy. Close circles grew smaller, loyalty became paramount, and for the first time in years, there was a sense of stability, however fragile. Reinvention was not just professional, it was personal, a recalibration of priorities that suggested a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. The most powerful part of this reinvention was how it reframed the narrative. Instead of being defined solely by scandals, the artist began to be defined by resilience, creativity, and growth. Media outlets that once thrived on tearing them down now wrote cautiously respectful profiles. Awards committees, once hesitant, began to extend nominations again. The industry, always quick to discard those who fall, seemed willing to welcome them back, not as the same figure who once dominated, but as someone new, someone forged in fire and stronger for it. This reinvention also revealed something essential about fame itself, that survival depends on adaptation. The artist's evolution wasn't a betrayal of their past, but a continuation of it, proof that chaos can give birth to clarity, and downfall can set the stage for rebirth. By embracing change instead of resisting it, they turned what could have been the end of their story into the beginning of a new chapter. For fans, this was inspiring, for critics, it was disarming, and for the artist, it was liberation. But reinvention is not a destination. It is a process, one that requires constant balance between who you were, who you are, and who you want to be. Even as they embraced new sounds, new images, and new roles, the echoes of their past never fully disappeared. Old controversies resurfaced occasionally, reminders that reinvention doesn't erase history. Yet instead of being undone by those echoes, the artist learned to incorporate them into the narrative, acknowledging mistakes while refusing to be defined by them. It was this balance, honesty about the past and hope for the future, that made the evolution so compelling. Looking back, the reinvention and evolution of this artist stand as one of the most defining moments of their career. It wasn't about abandoning the chaos, but transforming it, turning pain into power and scandal into substance. It proved that fame doesn't have to destroy, it can rebuild, reshape, and even redeem. For fans, it was proof that their loyalty had not been in vain. For the industry, it was a reminder that resilience is as much a talent as music itself, and for the artist, it was vindication, proof that no matter how deep the fall, there is always room to rise again, stronger, sharper, and more unforgettable than before. Legacy is a word often reserved for artists whose careers are over, a kind of retrospective label placed after the dust has settled and the noise has faded. But in the case of this artist, the legacy was being written in real time, shaped by every performance, every controversy, and every reinvention. Unlike many who fade quietly, their story remained active, alive, unpredictable. And that unpredictability itself became part of the legacy. To To watch their career was to watch history unfold, not as a closed book, but as a manuscript still in progress, with new chapters added before anyone had the chance to finish the last. It wasn't just about the music anymore, it was about the impact, the cultural footprint, and the way they forced conversations no one else dared to start. What made their legacy so fascinating was the duality at its core. On one hand, they were a survivor, a figure who had endured storms that would have ended lesser careers and still managed to return with music that resonated deeply. On the other, they were a disruptor, someone who never let the industry dictate the rules, and who often seemed more comfortable breaking them than following them. That tension, between survival and disruption, created a legacy that was complex, messy, and utterly human. And in that messiness lay its strength, because fans didn't just admire the music, they felt connected to the chaos, the struggle, the fight to stay relevant in a world quick to discard its icons. The legacy also existed in the way they influenced a generation of younger artists. For some, the lesson was musical, how to merge raw vulnerability with commercial appeal, how to write songs that could dominate charts while still feeling personal and confessional. For others, the influence was more about attitude, the courage to be unapologetic, the refusal to be silenced, the audacity to live openly even when it meant enduring criticism. New artists cited them as inspiration not only for their art, but for their defiance, their refusal to let scandal or struggle erase their presence. In that sense, the artist's legacy was not just personal, it was generational, a torch passed down to those who saw in their chaos a blueprint for survival. Another dimension of their legacy was the way they blurred lines. They weren't just a musician, but a cultural figure whose story extended into fashion, activism, and media. Every reinvention came with a ripple effect, influencing styles, conversations, and even industries beyond music. When they changed their look, trends shifted. When they spoke on issues, headlines followed. When they stumbled, debates erupted. In this way, the legacy was not just about albums or tours, it was about a cultural impact that seeped into every corner of public life. Few artists achieve that level of influence, and even fewer do so while battling the kind of personal turmoil that seemed to shadow their every step. But what truly defined the legacy in the making was the way it forced people to confront contradictions. How could someone so troubled produce art so brilliant? How could someone so unpredictable remain so consistent in their relevance? How could someone criticize so heavily still command so much loyalty? These contradictions became central to the myth, turning the artist into a figure larger than life, someone whose flaws did not diminish their greatness but amplified it. In a world that often demands perfection from its idols, their imperfections became the defining feature of their legend. The message was clear. Greatness does not require flawlessness, it requires resilience, honesty, and the ability to turn pain into something that others can feel. Of course, legacies are not written without cost. The constant pressure to remain relevant, the endless scrutiny, the haunting presence of past scandals, all of these threaten to overshadow the story. Critics argued that the legacy would always be tainted, always defined by the chaos as much as by the music. But perhaps that was the point. To sanitize the story would be to erase what made it real. The legacy in the making was not about polishing the narrative until it gleamed. It was about embracing the jagged edges, the scars, and the messiness that made it unique. In doing so, the artist created a legacy that was not just theirs, but one that belonged to anyone who had ever struggled, stumbled, and still refused to give up. The power of their legacy also lay in its unpredictability. Unlike stars whose careers followed neat arcs, rise, peak, fade, this artist defied categorization. Every time it seemed the story was over, they wrote a new chapter. Every time critics declared them finished, they reappeared with something that forced the world to pay attention again. This unpredictability kept the legacy alive, kept fans watching, and kept the industry guessing. It was a legacy not of neat endings, but of constant renewal, proof that survival itself can be a form of artistry. As the years went on, the question of how history would remember them became a subject of fascination. Would they be remembered primarily for the music, for the scandals, or for the resilience? The truth was likely all three, intertwined in a way that could not be separated. To erase one part of the story would be to erase the essence of who they were. The legacy then was not a single thread, but a tapestry, woven from triumphs and tragedies alike. It was a legacy that could not be easily summarized because it was still being written, still unfolding with every choice, every song, every moment of reinvention. For fans, the legacy was personal. They saw themselves in the struggles, found strength in the comebacks, and felt pride in the victories. For critics, the legacy was confounding, a constant reminder that brilliance and chaos can coexist. For the industry, it was a cautionary tale and an inspiration, proof that no one is too broken to return and no one too controversial to be forgiven. And for the artists themselves, the legacy in the making was a lifeline, a chance to prove that everything they endured had meaning, that the pain had a purpose, and that the fight to stay relevant was not in vain. In the end, what made the legacy so powerful was its refusal to be finished. Unlike those who fade quietly into history, this artist refused to let the story end, refused to stop writing, refused to let the world close the book. The legacy was alive, unpredictable, and ongoing, a testament not only to talent but to sheer willpower. And as long as they continued to evolve, to fight, and to create, the legacy would grow, becoming not just the story of an artist, but the story of resilience itself. To understand the true magnitude of this artist's career, you cannot confine the conversation to a single country, a single market, or even a single genre. Their story transcended borders, languages, and cultures in a way that few performers ever managed to achieve. While some stars dominate their home countries and struggle to break through internationally, this artist became a global phenomenon, a name that sparked recognition from Los Angeles to Lagos, from Tokyo to London, and from Sao Paulo to Johannesburg. The influence wasn't just about record sales or streaming numbers, it was about cultural penetration, about becoming a figure whose impact could be felt in the fashion choices of teenagers in Europe, the slang of youth in Africa, and the headlines of tabloids in Asia. They didn't simply create music, they created moments that the world consumed collectively, moments that blurred the line between celebrity and cultural movement. The key to their global reach was adaptability. They understood that to resonate across borders, one had to embrace diversity, not just in sound but in image, messaging, and presence. Their music reflected this, seamlessly blending genres in ways that appealed to different audiences. Pop hooks layered with hip-hop energy, R&B vulnerability mixed with electronic beats, experimental collaborations with international artists. All of these moves positioned them not as an artist of one culture, but as a citizen of the world. This adaptability also extended to their persona. They could be glamorous and larger than life for Western audiences, raw and vulnerable for markets that craved authenticity, and unapologetically bold for fans who wanted rebellion. By refusing to stay in one lane, they made themselves accessible to millions who saw in them pieces of their own stories. Global influence also meant global controversies. What made headlines in one country often spread instantly to others, thanks to social media and the interconnected nature of fame. A single statement could trigger debates worldwide, a single misstep could dominate international news cycles, and a single performance could spark admiration and outrage in equal measure. In some ways, this magnified the chaos of their career, but it also underscored the scale of their influence. Not many artists can say their actions create ripple effects on multiple continents at once, but this one could. And whether the reaction was love, criticism, or fascination, it kept them relevant in markets where trends usually fade as quickly as they arrive. Another facet of their cultural reach was fashion. From the start, they understood that style was a language more universal than words. Their wardrobe choices, often bold, sometimes outrageous, consistently made statements that were emulated worldwide. A hairstyle worn on stage one night would appear in salons across the globe weeks later. Outfits that were once mocked for being too eccentric suddenly became mainstream trends, once the world realized that this artist's audacity had reshaped the standard. Fashion houses courted them. Brands sought collaborations, and designers admitted their collections were inspired by their fearlessness. Through fashion, they extended their influence beyond music and into the everyday lives of millions who wanted to feel just a little bit of their daring spirit. But perhaps the most profound element of their cultural reach was the way they inspired conversations about identity. They challenged norms of gender, sexuality, and expression in ways that resonated globally. For fans in more conservative regions, simply watching this artist unapologetically be themselves was revolutionary. For others, it was liberating, a reminder that self-expression doesn't require permission. The discussions they sparked weren't always comfortable, but they were necessary, and they gave countless people around the world the courage to live more authentically. In this way, their global influence went beyond entertainment. It reshaped societal narratives, pushing boundaries of acceptance in cultures where conformity was often demanded. Their influence also stretched into activism, though not always in the traditional sense. Sometimes activism was deliberate, speaking out on issues like inequality, injustice, or personal freedom. Other times, it was unintentional. By simply existing loudly and unapologetically, they became a symbol of resistance for marginalized groups. Across continents, fans adopted their music as anthems of empowerment, playing their songs at protests, rallies, and personal moments of transformation. The idea that one artist's voice could reverberate through struggles and triumphs in places they had never set foot is a testament to the depth of their global impact. Even the controversies, which often threatened to derail their career, added to their cultural footprint. In countries where tabloids thrive on scandal, their name became shorthand for drama and unpredictability. In markets that prized resilience, the comebacks made them a figure of admiration. And in places where fame itself was exotic, their existence represented both aspiration and caution. The fact that one person could be interpreted in so many ways by so many different cultures speaks to the versatility of their persona. They weren't just a celebrity. They were a mirror, reflecting whatever people needed to see, whether that was inspiration, chaos, rebellion, or artistry. Technology amplified this influence in unprecedented ways. Social media ensured that every post, every live stream, every offhand comment reached millions instantly. Fans in different time zones didn't just consume their art, they interacted with their persona, creating memes, sharing clips, and fueling conversations that kept them trending across platforms. This digital presence solidified their global reach, making them not just a star of traditional media, but an icon of the internet age. And while social media often intensified the scrutiny, it also democratized fame, allowing fans from remote corners of the world to feel connected to the artist in ways previous generations never could. The global influence also had a financial dimension. Tours sold out across continents, merchandise flew off shelves in countries where they had never even performed, and endorsements turned into multi-million-dollar deals with international brands. This economic impact was staggering, proving that their reach wasn't just cultural but also commercial. They weren't just shaping conversations, they were shaping economies, industries, and markets. And for many corporations, attaching their brand to this artist meant instant access to diverse global audiences. Ultimately, what made their cultural reach so enduring was its authenticity. They didn't craft their persona to please the world. They crafted it to please themselves, and the world either accepted it or didn't. That raw honesty resonated deeply across borders because it was rare in a world of manufactured stars. Fans everywhere, regardless of culture, language, or background, recognized the courage it took to be unapologetically real in an industry built on illusions, and that recognition translated into loyalty, ensuring that even in their lowest moments, they retained a global base that refused to abandon them. Their story reminds us that global influence isn't about perfection, it's about resonance, about creating moments and messages that connect with people far beyond the boundaries of geography. For this artist, the world wasn't just an audience, it was a stage, a canvas, and a battleground. And the legacy of their cultural reach will be remembered not just in numbers, but in the way they gave millions across the planet permission to dream bigger, live louder, and embrace the messy, complicated beauty of being unapologetically themselves. Fame, as dazzling as it looks from the outside, comes with a cost that often feels invisible until it's too late. For this artist, the price of fame was steep, paid not only in sleepless nights and endless headlines, but in the quiet sacrifices that chipped away at their personal life, their peace of mind, and even their health. When the spotlight shines that brightly, it exposes everything, every flaw, every mistake, every secret, until privacy itself becomes a luxury. And the irony is that the higher they climbed, the less control they had over their own existence. From the outside, it looked like success without limits, but behind the curtain, the reality was far heavier. The first sacrifice was anonymity. From the moment their name began to dominate charts and headlines, life as an ordinary individual was gone forever. Simple tasks like walking through an airport, shopping at a grocery store, or sitting in a cafe became impossible without swarms of cameras and fans. While attention seemed flattering at first, over time it became suffocating, stripping away the freedom to move, breathe, and exist without being watched. Every expression was photographed, every outfit analysed, every casual interaction turned into a headline. The exhaustion of never being able to blend in, of always being seen, became one of fame's cruelest tricks. Another price was relationships. Friends became distant, family bonds strained, and romantic connections complicated under the weight of constant scrutiny. Anyone close to the artist was pulled into the spotlight, whether they wanted it or not, and this often drove people away. Some connections fractured under the pressure of public intrusion, while others simply couldn't withstand the demands of a life lived at such intensity. The artist, who once craved closeness, found themselves building walls instead, unsure who they could truly trust. Were people there for the person they were or for the fame they carried? The line blurred so much that trust itself became a gamble, leaving loneliness to creep in despite the crowds that surrounded them. The pressure to maintain an image was another invisible burden. Fame creates an illusion of perfection, an expectation that every performance, every public appearance, and every move must be flawless. But no human can live under that kind of microscope forever. The artist, like anyone else, had flaws, fears, and insecurities, yet they were expected to hide them all behind a mask of confidence. This constant performance extended beyond the stage and into daily life, where even moments of vulnerability were weaponized against them by tabloids and critics. The result was a kind of double existence, who they were privately and who they were expected to be publicly. And the gap between the two grew heavier with time, dragging them into cycles of self-doubt and exhaustion. The physical toll was undeniable. Endless touring schedules, late-night recording sessions, and relentless promotional demands left little room for rest. The body, no matter how strong, eventually breaks under such pressure. Illnesses went untreated, exhaustion became chronic, and self-care fell to the bottom of the list. The glamour of fame disguised the fact that behind the lights and music, the artist was running on fumes, pushing themselves past limits in order to meet expectations that never seemed to ease. And when exhaustion turned into collapse, the headlines didn't sympathize. They sensationalized, turning pain into spectacle. Perhaps the most painful sacrifice was mental health. The constant scrutiny, criticism, and pressure created an environment where anxiety, depression, and isolation thrived. Imagine waking up each day knowing that millions of people will judge your every word, your every choice, your very existence. For the artist, this reality eroded the sense of self, making them question not only their career but their worth. While fans saw confidence, the truth was that behind closed doors, moments of despair often outweighed moments of joy. The fame that once felt like a dream often transformed into a prison, locking them into cycles of public adoration and private suffering. And yet there was another sacrifice: time. Fame demanded every hour, every ounce of energy, every moment that could have been spent living a quieter, simpler life. Birthdays, family milestones, even ordinary days of rest were traded for rehearsals, interviews, and tours. The artist gave the world everything, but in return lost much of the life most people take for granted. In chasing the dream, they gave up the chance to simply be. That absence weighed heavily, especially as they grew older, looking back at moments they missed while the world applauded. The cruelest part of this sacrifice was that the world often pretended not to see it. Fans demanded more, the media wanted headlines, and the industry pushed for profit, all while ignoring the human being at the centre of it all. And because fame itself is addictive, the artist felt trapped in a cycle where stepping back meant losing everything they had built. They carried the burden silently, knowing that to complain would be seen as ungrateful. But gratitude doesn't erase exhaustion, and success doesn't shield anyone from the toll of carrying too much for too long. Still, through all the costs and sacrifices, the artist persisted. They endured the loneliness, the scrutiny, the pressure, because somewhere in the noise was the love of millions of fans who found hope, strength, and joy in their work. That connection became both a burden and a lifeline, a reminder that their pain wasn't in vain, that their sacrifices weren't invisible. The very thing that drained them also gave them purpose, a paradox that defines fame for so many who live in its shadow. The price of fame will always be controversial. Some say it's worth it. After all, the wealth, recognition, and influence are unparalleled. Others argue it's too high, no amount of success justifying the loss of self. For this artist, the truth lay somewhere in between. The sacrifices were real, the pain undeniable, but the legacy created through those sacrifices touched millions of lives across the globe. And while fame stripped away much, it also gave them the chance to transform, to reinvent, and to leave a mark on the world that would last long after the spotlight dimmed. In the end, fame is a bargain no one fully understands until they are inside it. For this artist, it was a trade that brought unimaginable highs and devastating lows, a deal that gave them everything and took nearly as much away. And while the world saw the glitz, the reality was far more complicated, layered with sacrifice, loss, and resilience. That complexity is what makes their story resonate, because it shows that even the brightest stars burn at a cost, and it is in that cost that the humanity behind the fame is revealed. Redemption is a word thrown around easily in stories of fame, but in the case of this artist, it wasn't a simple headline or a neatly tied conclusion. It was a process, a journey through chaos, mistakes, survival, and ultimately self-awareness. After years of turbulence, the arc of their story began to bend toward reflection, as if the storms that had once threatened to destroy them became the very forces that taught them resilience. Redemption did not mean the erasure of the past. It meant accepting it, acknowledging the scars, and choosing to move forward with clarity rather than denial. And in that choice lay the seeds of their legacy, one not defined solely by scandals or controversies, but by the capacity to grow, evolve, and transform in front of the very audience that once doubted their survival. The earliest hints of redemption came in the form of self-awareness. Where once defiance and denial dominated their responses to criticism, now there was honesty, sometimes raw and uncomfortable. Interviews shifted from defensive outbursts to moments of candor, where the artist admitted to struggles with mental health, the weight of public scrutiny, and the consequences of their own actions. For fans, this honesty was disarming. They weren't just watching a superstar, they were witnessing a human being peeling back the armor and revealing vulnerability. That vulnerability, once seen as weakness, became one of their greatest strengths, reminding millions that even icons are not immune to pain. Reflection played a critical role in this stage of their journey. The chaos of their earlier career had been fueled by impulsivity, by an endless cycle of reacting rather than pausing, but now there was space for contemplation. The artist began to look back, not with bitterness, but with a desire to learn. They acknowledged broken relationships, missed opportunities, and self-inflicted wounds, not to dwell on them, but to understand how those choices shaped their path. This reflection extended into their artistry, as lyrics became more personal, introspective, and raw. Songs that once focused on bravado and rebellion now carried undertones of healing, resilience, and lessons learned. Fans who grew alongside the artist connected deeply with this evolution, seeing their own struggles reflected in the words of someone who had lived through extremes most could only imagine. But redemption is not only personal, it is also relational. Part of the journey involved rebuilding bridges that fame and chaos had burned. The artist sought reconciliation with family members once estranged, reaching out quietly, away from cameras to repair bonds that years of scandals had frayed. Friendships lost to mistrust and fame's heavy hand were revisited, some rekindled, others left in the past as lessons. Even in the industry, where grudges run deep, they began to mend ties with peers and collaborators, showing humility in ways many never expected. These efforts were not about erasing the damage, but about proving that growth was real, that redemption was not a performance, but a choice lived out over time. The reflection also shaped their public image. The artist began to appear less in the tabloids and more in conversations about artistry, resilience, and advocacy. Media outlets that once thrived on sensationalizing their downfalls began to frame them as a figure of survival, someone who had endured the worst of fame and emerged with clarity. This shift was not orchestrated by a team of publicists but by the undeniable weight of transformation. The world, once eager to write them off, now seemed fascinated by their endurance, as if witnessing not just a comeback, but a redefinition of what legacy can look like in the modern age. One of the most powerful aspects of this redemption arc was the way it inspired others. Fans who had followed the artist from their chaotic beginnings found hope in their ability to rise again. Struggles with addiction, mental health, and personal loss were no longer just tabloid fodder. They became testimonies of survival that resonated with millions facing their own battles. Messages poured in from people who credited the artist's honesty and resilience with giving them courage, proof that legacy is not built solely on awards or records but on impact. In this way, the redemption became bigger than the artists themselves. It became a collective story of hope, one that allowed countless others to believe in second chances. At the heart of redemption, however, was acceptance. Acceptance of the fact that perfection was never possible, that mistakes would always be part of the journey, and that legacy would always carry both the brilliance and the chaos of the past. Instead of running from that duality, the artist embraced it. They no longer sought to silence the controversies that once defined them, but instead wove them into their narrative as evidence of growth. This acceptance created a powerful authenticity that made their reinvention not just believable but inspiring. They weren't pretending to be flawless. They were proving that flaws, acknowledged and overcome, can become the foundation of greatness. The shaping of legacy became the final chapter of this redemption story. Legacy, after all, is not about the moments of downfall, but about what rises after them. For this artist, legacy was being rewritten not just in music, but in influence, impact, and inspiration. They had gone from being a cautionary tale of fame's destructive power to an emblem of resilience, proof that reinvention is possible even after the harshest storms. Their influence on fashion, culture, and societal conversations became part of that legacy, but more importantly, so did their vulnerability, their honesty, and their ability to reflect. Redemption and reflection are not glamorous processes. They are messy, ongoing, and deeply human, and that humanity is what will define this artist's story for generations. When future fans and critics look back, they will not just see the scandals or the chaos. They will see the arc of transformation, the willingness to grow, and the courage to face both failures and victories with equal honesty. That courage is what turns fame into legacy, and it is what cements this artist's place in cultural history. In the end, redemption is not about erasing the past. It is about owning it, learning from it, and then using it to shape a future that inspires. For this artist, redemption became the greatest performance of all, one not staged for applause but lived out in the slow, steady rebuilding of a life, a career, and a legacy. And in that redemption lies the most powerful truth, that even the most chaotic stories can find clarity, even the most broken narratives can be rewritten, and even the most unlikely figures can leave behind a legacy that is not defined by their downfall but by their rise. Influence is often the truest measure of an artist's legacy, and in the case of this figure, their impact on the next generation cannot be overstated. What makes their influence so striking is not just the music they created, but the way they redefined what it meant to be an artist in a world where fame, chaos, and reinvention collided. They did not simply release songs that became hits. They modeled a way of living, performing, and even surviving that younger artists watched closely, sometimes emulating, sometimes avoiding, but always acknowledging. In every new performer who pushes boundaries, in every rising star who turns vulnerability into power, there are traces of this artist's blueprint, and that influence ensures their presence in the industry long after their own prime has passed. One of the most obvious areas of influence was in the sound itself. Artists coming up after them were quick to borrow elements of their genre-blending style, mixing pop, hip-hop, R&B, and electronic music into hybrids that defied classification. This fearless approach to music making created a ripple effect, giving permission to newer voices to experiment without fear of being boxed in. No longer did an artist have to choose a lane and stay in it. They could weave between sounds, pulling from global influences and creating something entirely unique. The courage to blend, to disrupt genres, and to carve out new spaces in music came directly from watching this artist break those rules unapologetically. For a new generation raised in an age of streaming, where diversity of sound was an asset rather than a liability, this influence became invaluable. Beyond sound, their image and persona also shaped how younger artists approached fame. They demonstrated that being controversial, bold, and unapologetically authentic could be just as powerful as being polished and safe. Their defiance of industry norms encouraged rising stars to embrace their quirks, their flaws, and even their chaos, understanding that audiences often connect more deeply with honesty than perfection. This shift created an entire generation of artists less interested in fitting molds and more interested in shattering them. From fashion-forward performers to outspoken newcomers unafraid of backlash, the echoes of this artist's boldness can be found everywhere. The influence stretched into fashion and identity. Younger artists, watching them dominate headlines with daring wardrobe choices and fluid expressions of style, began to realize that fashion could be more than aesthetics. It could be a weapon, a message, a performance in itself. Outfits became statements, hairstyles became rebellions, and public appearances transformed into extensions of artistry. This artist showed that self-presentation wasn't secondary to music. It was part of the art, part of the identity that made fans connect and critics debate. Today, when new artists arrive on red carpets in avant-garde pieces or curate aesthetics that blur the lines of gender and tradition, they are following a path carved by someone who dared to be ridiculed until the ridicule turned into reverence. Their willingness to be vulnerable also shaped the way the next generation approached storytelling in music. In an industry once obsessed with glamour and invincibility, this artist revealed pain, struggle, and imperfection in ways that humanized them. They admitted mistakes, revealed their battles, and wove those themes into their art. Younger performers saw that vulnerability didn't weaken their image, it strengthened it, creating bonds with fans that no amount of polished PR could replicate. Today, when rising stars openly discuss mental health, addiction, or personal struggles in their music, they are standing on ground this artist helped make safe. Vulnerability became a form of strength, and that redefinition is now a cornerstone of modern artistry. The influence also extended to how younger artists navigated fame itself. By watching both their rise and their downfall, newcomers gained a roadmap, sometimes of what to emulate, sometimes of what to avoid. They learned that fame could be both intoxicating and destructive, that reinvention was essential, and that survival required boundaries. In this way, the artist became not only an inspiration but also a cautionary tale, shaping how others balance success with self-preservation. Some learned to protect their privacy more fiercely, others leaned into chaos knowingly, but all did so with the awareness that this artist had already shown the world the extremes of both paths. Another profound area of influence was cultural representation. They demonstrated that an artist didn't have to fit a single mold of identity or adhere to expectations of tradition in order to succeed globally. Their defiance of labels, whether of gender, sexuality, or cultural background, empowered younger artists to present themselves authentically, even if it meant defying industry pressure. Representation became more than inclusion, it became a declaration of individuality. This shift resonated with a generation increasingly aware of identity politics and social justice, allowing music to serve as a platform not just for entertainment, but for empowerment. Their activism, whether deliberate or implicit, also influenced new voices. By lending their platform to causes, by speaking about injustices, and by simply existing as a figure who challenged societal norms, they proved that artists could be more than entertainers, they could be catalysts for change. Younger performers took note, weaving activism into their branding, their music, and their public personas. From climate change to racial justice to LGBTQ+ rights, new stars now stand unapologetically on the front lines, emboldened by the example set by an artist who risked backlash to speak out. Technology played a key role in amplifying this influence. The artist was among the early figures to harness social media not just as promotion but as performance, turning posts into events and live streams into stages. Younger artists inherited this approach, crafting digital identities that blurred the line between public and private. The authenticity, chaos, and direct connection pioneered in their digital presence became a template for a generation raised online. Today, when artists go viral for candid moments, drop music directly to fans through apps, or turn memes into marketing, they are walking through doors first opened by someone who made the internet an extension of fame. The influence on stagecraft cannot be overlooked. The artist's performances, often theatrical and unpredictable, set a new bar for live entertainment. They demonstrated that a concert could be more than singing songs. It could be a narrative, a spectacle, a piece of living art. Younger artists now craft tours not as playlists but as immersive experiences, with choreography, visuals and storytelling all woven together. The idea that performance is an extension of identity and not just a recitation of hits is now ingrained in the industry thanks to their trailblazing approach. In the end, the influence of this artist on the next generation lies in their complexity. They were not a perfect model to emulate, nor a simple cautionary tale to avoid. They were both at once. They taught younger artists that brilliance and chaos can coexist, that reinvention is survival, and that vulnerability is power. They reminded the world that to influence is not to dictate, but to inspire possibility. And for the next generation, that possibility is limitless, shaped by the daring example of someone who lived without restraint, paid the price, and still left behind a blueprint for artistry that will ripple through music and culture for decades to come. Every great artist leaves behind a story that feels larger than life, but the most captivating stories are the ones that feel unfinished, the ones where the audience can't help but speculate about what might come next. For this artist, their journey has been filled with highs so dizzying and lows so devastating that predicting the future feels almost impossible. Yet that unpredictability is part of the allure. Fans, critics, and the industry at large continue to watch closely, asking not just what the artist has already done, but what they might dare to do in the years ahead. That sense of suspense keeps their name in constant conversation, proving that sometimes the anticipation of what's next is as powerful as the history already made. Speculation about the future often begins with the music. After cycles of reinvention, controversy and redemption, there is always the question of what new sound they will embrace. Will they dive deeper into introspection, crafting albums that reflect maturity and wisdom gained through years of experience? Or will they once again shock the world by returning to their roots with a sound that recalls the raw chaos of their early career? Perhaps they will merge both, blending the fire of their youth with the clarity of their present. Fans argue endlessly over which direction is most likely, but the truth is that unpredictability has always been their brand. Whatever comes next musically will almost certainly push boundaries, whether through collaborations with unexpected artists, experimental production, or lyrics that peel back yet another layer of their life. The speculation alone fuels anticipation, keeping fans on edge for every announcement and hint. Future speculation also surrounds their role in the broader culture. Having once been seen as purely controversial, they now occupy a space of influence that reaches far beyond music. Some believe the next chapter could see them cementing a role as an industry leader, mentoring younger artists and using their hard-won wisdom to guide the next generation. Others imagine them stepping even further outside of music into film, fashion or activism, areas where they have already shown flashes of brilliance. Each possibility feels believable because this is an artist who has never confined themselves to one identity. The unfinished nature of their story is rooted in that very fluidity, the idea that reinvention is always possible and the next transformation could look entirely different from what anyone expects. Speculation also thrives around their personal life, which has always been intertwined with their career. Will they choose to step back from the spotlight to find balance, focusing on family, relationships, and health rather than constant reinvention? Or will they continue to live boldly in the public eye, embracing the chaos and unpredictability that made them iconic in the first place? Fans are divided, with some hoping for peace and stability, while others crave the fireworks of another dramatic reinvention. The uncertainty only deepens the fascination. Unlike artists who fade quietly into the background, this figure feels destined to remain a subject of speculation precisely because their story has never followed a predictable path. Another aspect of the unfinished story is the constant tension between legacy and relevance. Many artists reach a point where their past accomplishments overshadow their present, but this artist continues to defy that narrative. Even after years of controversy, they find ways to insert themselves back into the cultural conversation, whether through shocking public appearances, surprising collaborations, or outspoken commentary on social issues. This ability to remain relevant makes the future even more intriguing. Will they focus on preserving and polishing their legacy, ensuring that their name is remembered for resilience and artistry rather than chaos? Or will they continue to chase relevance in ways that risk reigniting old controversies? The duality of those choices makes every move they make a subject of endless analysis. Speculation also extends to their role in technology and new media. In an era where digital platforms shape careers as much as traditional industries, many wonder if this artist will pioneer new ways of connecting with audiences. Could they launch independent projects that bypass traditional labels, using streaming, apps, or immersive digital experiences to redefine how music and celebrity function? Given their history of boldness and risk-taking, it feels entirely possible. For younger generations raised in an online-first culture, such a move would not only solidify their relevance but also position them once again as a disruptor, a title they have carried since their earliest days. Even more intriguing is the speculation about how history will ultimately frame their story. Will they be remembered as a cautionary tale of fame's destructive power, or as a symbol of survival and reinvention? The truth is that they embody both, and perhaps that is what makes their story so compelling. Future narratives may shift depending on what choices they make in the coming years, but the fact that their legacy feels unfinished ensures that cultural historians, critics, and fans will continue to debate their place in history. That debate itself is part of the power. They are not easily defined, and the uncertainty ensures they remain unforgettable. The unfinished story also reflects a universal truth about human fascination. People are drawn to figures who resist closure. In literature, films, and history, the most compelling characters are those who leave us wondering, those whose arcs don't resolve neatly. This artist fits perfectly into that archetype. Their story resists being neatly packaged, and that resistance makes them feel alive, relevant, and endlessly fascinating. Every announcement, every silence, every appearance feels loaded with possibility, as though the next twist could redefine everything we think we know about them. For fans, this speculation is part of the thrill. It allows them to project their own hopes, fears, and imaginations onto the artist, creating a bond that is as much about possibility as it is about reality. For critics, it is a challenge. How do you write about someone whose story refuses to end? And for the artists themselves, it is both a blessing and a burden. The freedom to reinvent endlessly is powerful, but the pressure to keep surprising the world is immense. That tension ensures the story remains unfinished because every chapter feels like a prelude to another. In the end, the most fascinating thing about this artist is not what they have already done, but what they might still do. The unfinished nature of their story is what keeps them in the spotlight, what fuels conversations and speculations across the globe. Whether they choose to retreat into quiet reflection, surge forward with bold reinventions, or redefine themselves yet again through unexpected ventures, the world will watch. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy of all, not simply the music, the scandals, or the reinventions, but the sense of anticipation, the feeling that the story isn't over, that the next chapter could arrive at any moment and change everything we thought we knew. Fame is often seen as a glittering prize, the ultimate validation of talent, ambition, and perseverance. But for those who live inside its blinding spotlight, fame can feel more like a labyrinth, a place where every step forward is met with shadows, where every triumph is accompanied by doubt, and where the adoration of millions can coexist with an unbearable sense of isolation. This artist's story offers one of the most vivid reflections on what fame truly means, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived reality that shapes every decision, every relationship, and every dream. Their life has become a mirror of humanity itself, exposing both the beauty and the tragedy of what happens when a person is elevated beyond ordinary existence, yet remains vulnerable to the same struggles as anyone else. From the earliest days of their career, fame was presented as both an opportunity and a test. Overnight, the world began to view them not as a private individual, but as a symbol, a brand, an object of fascination. Every action, every word, every silence became subject to analysis and judgment. For a young artist unprepared for that weight, the sudden exposure was overwhelming, yet instead of retreating, they embraced the chaos, channeling it into their art and using controversy as fuel for their rise. This decision reflected a fundamental truth. Fame is never passive. It consumes those who try to ignore it, but it can be wielded like a weapon by those bold enough to manipulate its energy. Still, the price of such boldness was steep, leaving scars that never fully healed. As their career evolved, fame became less of a choice and more of a condition, like an illness that could not be cured, but only managed. There was no escaping the cameras, the speculation, the rumours. Even in moments of personal tragedy, the world demanded access, as though the artist's pain was public property. That tension between private humanity and public expectation defined their life. On one hand, fame provided unimaginable wealth, influence, and creative freedom. On the other, it stripped away the fundamental right to simply exist without scrutiny. The public saw the glitter, but behind the curtain, the human being struggled with exhaustion, mistrust, and the gnawing question of whether they were loved for who they truly were or merely for the image they projected. Fame also created distortions in relationships. Friends became harder to trust, romances became entangled with suspicion, and even family ties strained under the weight of constant attention. People were drawn to the aura of celebrity, but often their loyalty was conditional, based on proximity to power rather than genuine care. For the artist, this reality fostered both paranoia and resilience. They became hyper-aware of who entered their circle, constantly scanning for motives, while at the same time building strength from the realization that true loyalty was rare and precious. The result was a paradoxical existence, surrounded by people, yet often lonelier than ever. And yet, fame also unlocked opportunities to connect with humanity on a scale few could imagine. Through their music, performances, and public persona, they became a vessel for millions of people's emotions. Fans projected their hopes, fears, and struggles onto the artist, finding comfort in the fact that someone so elevated could also be flawed, vulnerable, and real. In this way, fame became a strange kind of communion, binding together strangers across the world through the shared experience of following a single life. The artist's triumphs felt like victories for the fans, their failures like personal betrayals. This interconnectedness blurred the line between celebrity and humanity, making the artist both more accessible and more alien than ever. What makes their story so reflective of humanity is the way fame amplified both their virtues and their flaws. At times, it brought out generosity, creativity, and resilience, inspiring countless others to pursue their dreams. At other times, it magnified recklessness, arrogance, and self-destruction, serving as a cautionary tale about the dangers of excess. Fame, in this sense, acted like a magnifying glass, intensifying whatever lay within the individual and projecting it for the world to see. The result was a life that felt both extraordinary and painfully relatable. Every struggle they endured, from heartbreak to addiction to betrayal, echoed the struggles of ordinary people, only magnified on a stage that spanned the globe. Their story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about society's role in the machinery of fame. We, as consumers of celebrity culture, demand constant entertainment, constant access, constant drama. We elevate stars to unimaginable heights, then delight in tearing them down when they falter. This cycle of adoration and condemnation reflects not just the nature of fame, but the nature of humanity itself, the human tendency to project ideals onto others, to seek stories larger than life, and to punish those who fail to meet our impossible expectations. The artist became both a beneficiary and a victim of this cycle, navigating the paradox of being adored and condemned by the same audience. In their later years, fame began to transform into something different: perspective. Having lived through the firestorm of public obsession, they started to reflect openly on what it meant to be human within the cage of celebrity. They spoke about the illusions of fame, the way it promises fulfillment but often delivers emptiness, the way it magnifies loneliness even in the midst of adoration. These reflections struck a chord because they stripped away the glamour and revealed something raw and universal: the yearning for connection, authenticity, and peace. Fans saw not just a superstar, but a person grappling with the same existential questions everyone faces, only under a magnifying glass. The final reflection on fame and humanity is this: no matter how high a person rises, no matter how bright the spotlight shines, they remain human. They remain vulnerable to fear, doubt, love, and loss. The artist's journey illustrates the dual nature of fame. It is both a gift and a curse, a stage for brilliance and a trap for the soul. It shows that behind every headline, every scandal, every triumph, there is a human being who bleeds, who dreams, who longs for meaning. This truth, often forgotten in the frenzy of celebrity culture, is perhaps the most important lesson of all. Their story is not simply about one person's rise and fall, but about the human condition itself. Fame, in its extreme form, becomes a mirror of society's desires, insecurities and contradictions, and this artist, through their chaotic and mesmerizing journey, has forced us to look into that mirror and ask, what do we really want from our idols? Do we want them to be perfect, or do we crave their flaws because they remind us of our own humanity? Do we build them up to worship them, or to watch them crumble? The answers may vary, but the questions linger long after the music fades. In the end, the final reflection is that fame does not strip away humanity, it magnifies it. And in magnification, both the beauty and the ugliness are revealed. This artist's life remains one of the clearest demonstrations of that truth. A story that continues to resonate because it is not just about celebrity, but about what it means to be human in a world that never stops watching. Every story must eventually reach its ending, and yet the tale of this artist feels like one that can never truly be concluded. Their life, career, and legacy are stitched together not in neat chapters, but in chaotic threads of triumph and failure, brilliance and controversy, adoration and condemnation. To speak of them in final terms feels almost impossible because their influence refuses to fade. Every performance, every scandal, every whispered rumour adds another layer to a saga that continues to capture the imagination of millions. What makes their story resonate so powerfully isn't simply the music they created, or the fame they achieved, but the way their journey reflects the complexity of the human condition itself. They stand as both a cautionary tale and an inspiration, embodying the extremes of what it means to chase dreams under the crushing weight of global attention. Throughout their rise, the world saw how raw talent could propel someone from obscurity to superstardom, but also how fragile that ascent could be when weighed down by personal demons and relentless public scrutiny. Their early struggles revealed the cracks that fame would later widen, and their bold, unapologetic nature ensured that every high and low was amplified to maximum intensity. In their resilience, audiences saw the possibility of redemption. In their failures, they saw the destructive cost of fame. This duality made them endlessly fascinating, for they were never one-dimensional, never predictable, and never safely packaged into the mold of a typical celebrity. The legacy they leave behind forces us to ask larger questions about our relationship with fame itself. We often demand perfection from public figures while simultaneously craving their flaws. We elevate them as icons and then revel in their downfalls, forgetting that behind the headlines and the performances is a human being navigating struggles not unlike our own, only magnified under the relentless glare of the spotlight. This artist's life laid bare that paradox, showing how society both creates and consumes its stars with equal fervour, often leaving the individual at the centre trapped in a cycle of adoration and destruction. Yet, despite the chaos, their impact remains undeniable. They changed the landscape of music, shaped cultural conversations, and inspired countless people to pursue their passions without fear. Their controversies may have shocked the world, but their art provided solace, empowerment, and connection. They were proof that even the most flawed individuals can spark movements, ignite creativity, and leave behind a legacy that transcends their imperfections. That is the beauty and tragedy of their story. They were both larger than life and painfully human. As we reflect on their journey, the ultimate conclusion is that fame does not erase humanity. It magnifies it. Every triumph becomes monumental, every mistake catastrophic, every emotion amplified to levels few could withstand. And yet, in that magnification, we see ourselves reflected, our desires, our contradictions, our capacity for both greatness and self-destruction. This is why their story endures. It is not just about one artist, but about all of us, about the dangerous allure of chasing dreams, about the price of being seen, and about the eternal struggle to balance who we are with who the world demands us to be.